This is your facilitator lecturer, Professor Igube, continuing our discussion on SOC205. Hello class. Our topic this time is operant conditioning. We are still discussing associative learning, but from a different perspective. So our second type of learning is operant conditioning, different from classical conditioning. So you have two types of associative learning. You have number one, classical conditioning. You have two, operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is similar but very different from classical conditioning. In operant conditioning, for example, the training or the reinforcement behavior is different from what we have in classical conditioning, in that at the end you are eliciting a different behavior. In classical conditioning, it's the same behavior you are eliciting that is produced by the unconditional response. The salvating is the same behavior with the unconditional response, is the same behavior with the conditional response. But in operant conditioning, the behavior is different. So in a classical conditioning, the behavior is we call respondent behavior. While in operant conditioning, of course, the behavior is operant. What they're trying to say, for example, in a circus, when you teach a dog to roll over, the behavior is new. The dog is going to learn new behavior. While in classical conditioning, the behavior is just sort of still the same. So while these are different, the principles are still similar. We are still going to have extinction. We are still going to have generalization. We are still having discrimination, as we explained them in the last lecture. This type of associative learning is associated with F.B. Skinner. The other one was Pavlov. This one is with Skinner. And what are the materials? Let's talk about the materials you are going to need before we talk about the differences. And of course, again, we are using the experimental method. Later on, we are going to come back to social psychology methods, because it's by using this method, especially experiment, that we get new information on behavior and we understand behavior. And it's through experiments we can also introduce novel behavior, modify behavior, understand the behavior. So the experimental method becomes very important. What are the materials we need here? In terms of materials, of course, you need a lab. You need a Skinner box that Skinner did. You need a rat that is hungry, so that is motivated by hunger. And then the box where you put the rat is bare. The main thing there, you have a food magazine. It is a bar where eventually when the rat presses, the food is going to come out. So it's the same thing, you set the experiment and move out. You make sure that your materials are ready there. The Skinner box, the hungry rat, and the food magazine. Those are the main things that you are going to need. Then what is the experiment about? Now you put the hungry rat in the Skinner box. You could use other animals, bird or whatever, but the basic one that Skinner used was the rat, and then he sort of graduated to use other things. So you get the hungry rat and place it in the Skinner box, and you allow it to move freely. So the food magazine is placed somewhere. It's a random. It's placed somewhere in the Skinner box, and the rat is used to move around. So immediately we see a difference between the operant and the classical conditioning. In that, remember in the classical conditioning, the dog was stationary. It wasn't moving. It stayed in one place. It was actually tied to one place so that it doesn't move around. But in this particular one, the object or the subject matter of the research here is moving around. The rat is is left to move around, is left alone to move around. So what happens? It just moves around. We know it's hungry. So if the rat is hungry, definitely, what is it likely to be looking for? It's looking for food somewhere. So it's being motivated by hunger. It doesn't know where the food is. It doesn't know whether there is food. It moves around. Now what happens? After some time, after the movements, it depends on the rat, how hungry it is, and the kind of random movements, because these movements are actually random. So it depends on the random movements the rat makes, how hungry it is, how it's going to run around in the room. Eventually, it hits the food magazine. And when it hits the food magazine, what happens? The food falls out in the plate and it eats. Then what happened? Of course, the rat is happy. Now I said, of course, I'm a smart rat. So it hits again. It hits again. Of course, it's a smart rat also because it's likely not to move again. In this experiment, it didn't move again. Once it hit, it stayed in that place. So it ate. It hit again, and the food came out, it ate. So what is likely to happen? It's very, very hungry. So if it eats the food, just like you when you are eating, if you are hungry, the very first time you put so many spoons very fast in your mouth. So the rat did the same thing. It was very, very hungry. So once it hit once, and that's by chance, we have to keep that in mind. It hit by chance. Once it hit once, it hit again. And then once it hit again, it hit very fast, you know. Do you get me? It hit very fast, and every time it hit, the food came out. So what happened in this case again? We have a case of associative learning, because now the rat has learned to associate hitting the food magazine with getting the food. But also there is something different here. It's not only hitting the food magazine and getting the food, but the rat has actually to go in the container and eat the food. So it's not just hitting and the food coming out. It has to actually eat the food. So we see a lot of differences here. Well, in classical conditioning, the object was stagnant. It was not moving. It was passive. In operant conditioning, the object is moving around. So there are two concepts that are, they sound very simple, but they have very big implications for our behavior. So the rat hits the food magazine, then gets the food, and it hits it by chance. It's not really, so it hits it by chance and eats it. So what are the differences here? As we said, in classical conditioning, we have what we call respondent behavior. This is because the behavior is directly due to the stimulus. Once the light comes on and you give the food and the dog salivates. Without the food, the dog is not going to salivate. So the behavior is respondent. It occurs in response to the introduction of the food. And then later on, it occurs in response to the introduction of the food and the light, and consequently, finally, to the introduction of the light without the food, but is a response also to the light. So that is respondent behavior. But in this case, we are seeing a change, which is operant behavior. Why is it operant behavior? It's operant behavior because the rat has to move and maneuver the environment. It has to work on the environment. It has to move around first, find the food magazine. After finding the food magazine, hit. All these are random acts. Find the food magazine, hit it, and then eat the food. And then, why is it different? It's different because with the first experiment of classical conditioning, we see the dog having respondent behavior in salivating. It sees the food, it salivates. In other life also, we can also see another case of respondent behavior. For example, when light is flashed on your eye, the pupil changes. Your pupil changes. It changes. That is the respondent behavior because light is flashed on your eye and you respond to that light. But in terms of operant behavior, it goes beyond the flash of the light. So another example we can give in real life is the telephone. When the telephone rings, Okay, you sit here, maybe you're having your breakfast or reading your novel, watching a nice program, and the phone rings. So what does the phone tell us in terms of the phone rings? There are several things that you can do. One of them is that you can get up and go and answer the phone, or you can decide not to answer the phone. So when the phone rings, that is very compelling. You hear the phone and it's compelling. But before you can talk to the other person and answer the phone, you have to move from where you are, whether it's your room or where, and go to where the phone is. When you get to where the phone is, you can still either stay at the phone. Maybe you look at the name and you say, okay, I don't want to talk to that person. And you say, I don't want to talk to that person, so you don't pick the phone. Or you go and you pick the phone. So the ringing of the phone is compelling. It makes you move, or you don't move. So it can make you move to go to where the phone is. And once you get to where the phone is, you have to pick it and put it on your ear and answer the phone. So that's why we call that behavior operant behavior. Because you're operating on the environment. You are manipulating the environment. You're not just sitting down in one place. You have to get up, move, go to where the phone is, pick it, and put it on your ear and answer the phone. So that becomes operant behavior vis-a-vis the other behavior that is like a reflex action, operant conditioning. So one of the things here also what we measure is operant strength. What is operant strength? We look at the operant strength, the strength of the response. And the more frequent the response that occurs at the interval, the stronger it is. So there are two ways of measuring this operant strength. The first one, you measure this operant strength by the frequency of the hitting of the bar. So when the rat hits the bar, the food comes out, and it hits again, and it comes out. So if the learning is strong, if that connection is strong, it's going to hit very fast. It is faster and gets the food out. That's a measure of operant strength. Another measure is the number of responses before the behavior becomes extinct. So what happens is that when you remove the food magazine and the food is no longer there and the rat presses, no food comes out. So the strength of the operant conditioning is going to depend on how long it takes that behavior to become extinct. And we can apply that in our everyday life, that this operant behavior is more difficult to extinguish, particularly when you have partial reinforcement. Now, what is partial reinforcement? So when we are talking about partial reinforcement, what we are talking about is that the interval at which you give the food. For example, if you are giving the rat the food, you can give, maybe it presses 3 times, food comes out, then you don't put. It will keep pressing again, even when the food is not there. Then, of course, after some time, you give the food again. So it presses. So you keep it on, but it's partial, it's not continuous. And that behavior also has some connection with our everyday life. So the concept of partial reinforcement is great. And we can give an example of a child crossing the street. Like the mother teaches the child how to cross the street. Look right, look left, look left again. I think you can remember. We always tell you, look right, look left, then look right again before you cross. And the mother holds the child and they cross the street together. But then there are times when the mother is not going to be there. And because when the mother is not going to be there, the child is still going to remember when it goes to cross that I must look right and I must look left, and it will still cross. But the most dangerous thing, I remember even my teacher telling me when I was in undergraduate level student taking this course, some of the worst consequences of operant conditioning are like cases of gambling. Gambling is a case of what? Partial reinforcement. Gambling is a part of operant conditioning and partial reinforcement. Why is it partial? We are saying a case of partial reinforcement. Remember when the person goes to gamble, they may win once, isn't it? What happens after they win once? They want to play again, isn't it? Then they don't win. Maybe they lose 5 times. But they keep going in the hope that, that reinforcement is still there. I'm going to win the 10th time. Then they may win the 10th time. And then they are going to keep playing and say, and that's how the casino man makes his money. Because eventually this man becomes broke unless he's an expert. So habits like that are formed through operant conditioning, and particularly partial reinforcement, are very difficult to break. So partial reinforcement explains the gambling habit. And as I said earlier, partial reinforcement is more resistant to extinction than even continuous reinforcement. So when you are giving the dog the rat food and eats continuously, but when you start giving at intervals, that's the partial reinforcement. The rat is going to keep pressing because it knows maybe on the 10th time the food will come, so it keeps pressing. But the one with the full, let's say we can say with the full reinforcement, the meat comes, it presses, the meat comes, it presses. If it doesn't come, it starts to know it's not coming again. So the behavior starts to become extinct. But with partial reinforcement, you give the food 3 times, the 4th time, then the rat says, no, I have to keep pressing. By the 10th time, it will come. It presses. Then by the 10th time, it comes. Then it presses 20 times, and it doesn't come. But it still says, so that's why you find that gambling is a very difficult to break. And since that lecture, I told myself I will never gamble. And I've been telling my children and my students, don't go into gambling. Because once you get there, it's going to be a very difficult habit to break. And you can save yourself the heartache. And that's one of the values we talked about some time back. The first lecture we had, we talked about the value of having social psychology knowledge. Is that it makes life more easier. You have access to information that helps you to make your life easier, avoid certain things that can make your life miserable, and focus on what is good for your life. So knowledge of social psychology helps you in that way, that you're able to make good choices that help your life, that are positive, and then you avoid negative choices. Because of this, psychology has been useful to me, that you have been able to, at least you have the knowledge to be able to avoid, sort of engaging in certain behaviors. But of course, some people, like we were talking about partial reinforcement, some people, they will have the information and they will not use it. But I hope you, my students, will be able to use the information. So operant conditioning, also the principles can be used also to modify behavior in children. So you can use operant conditioning, in other words, in behavior modification. And one of the things I like about psychology or social psychology is what you call the sort of science of everyday life. Anything you learn here, you can apply immediately in your life. And I think that's why it is easier to pass. In the sense that, one, you have to read, you have to be in the know. But once you are in the know, it is easy to pass. So this is an A course. If you sit down and read, it's not going to go out of your brain. And why is it not going to go out of your brain? Because you can immediately apply any knowledge that you get here. Let's have an example of how we can apply some of this operant conditioning. So for example, if you have a shy child in the class, you may have a shy child. So how do you use knowledge of this operant conditioning to sort of help the child? So you might have a group of children that are playing, and this child is shy, is sitting there in their chair, they don't want to get up. So what you do, you urge the child to stand up. And when the child stands up and makes some movements towards the group, then you reinforce. Probably with words, you praise her, whatever, you can promise, you can do anything, promise the child. But so long as they are on their feet. Once they sit down, you don't reinforce positively. Once they stand up, then you enforce positively. And you have seen that with shy children. When you keep sort of reinforcing, eventually the child will go and join the group. So that's one of the ways that you can. Use this reinforcement principle in terms of operant conditioning. So these types of conditioning, both operant, classical, and conditioning, are very basic to our life. Like we said before, those are some of the ways we learn behavior through the reinforcement. And then also in terms of reinforcement, we come to the concept of positive and negative reinforcement. And I said earlier, we have already defined reinforcement. We can say it again. Reinforcement is an event whose occurrence increases the probability that a stimulus on subsequent occasions will evoke a response. That's what you said earlier, that reinforcement is anything that ensures that behavior will occur and will continue to occur. So it can be positive, it can be negative, and we can use it to make behavior become extinct. And we can use this in everyday life, as we said it. I don't know, my parents used to do that. If you did well in school, they gave you a present, and some parents still do. So if you do well in school and they buy you the bicycle or the toy you wanted, that's a reinforcement, positive reinforcement. Then you are going to work hard in school because you know you are going to get a reward. And that reward becomes a reinforcement because it increases the probability that you are going to sit down and read your books instead of going to play. So we have those reinforcements. And of course, it goes deeper than that in terms of teaching children. At times you have a child, let's assume they have a child who your 5 naira disappears. And eventually you get to know that maybe your child took the 5 naira. So what a sensible parent will do, you have to do what? Reinforce negatively. Either beat the child or do something. And so that the child now, if you beat the child is going to associate the beating with the beating with the stealing. So he knows that if I take the 5 naira, my parent is going to beat me up. And therefore, anytime they want to take the 5 naira, they won't take it because they know they are going to be beaten. But if you don't reinforce, then that means negatively. Then you are reinforcing the what? The bad behavior. And this occurs in many situations. So we encourage parents to be able to learn how to use the reinforcement, either positively or negatively, to shape the child's behavior. So you reinforce positively when the child does something laudable, something that is good, and reinforce negatively when the child does something that is bad or is against the morals of society. And this also can be used in the treatment, maybe of drug addicts and some people. You still use this concept of reinforcement. For example, of myself, when I was in school, I remember when I was in secondary school, I will go home and very tired, and my mother says, you have to take your book and read during the holidays. And I said, I don't want to read. And my mother, like she says, you have to sit down and read. And even if you don't want to read, you are going to sit down and hold that book for 2 hours. So definitely, you can't sit down and be looking at the book for 2 hours. What are you going to do? You sit down and read the book for 2 hours. And then once you do that during the holidays, if every day or every two days you are going to sit down and read the book for 2 hours, one, you are not going to tell your mother again that you are tired and you don't want to read. You just take the book and start reading it. And what happens? Eventually, you develop that habit of sitting down and concentrating and reading your books. So I'm very grateful to my parents who used both those positive and negative reinforcements, in that even at an early age they gave a present when we did well in school. So that kept me going. I knew at the end of the term I'm going to get a gift. And then with my father, you knew he had already said, if you fail any subject, it's beating. So you come back with a 40 or whatever, you are going to get a beating. And thank God I never qualified for that beating. I always qualified for a gift. Basically, those reinforcements helped me to sit down and read my books, and thank God I'm a professor now and here teaching you. And then of course the Bible also tells us, don't spare the rod. You beat up the child and they are going to shape up behavior. So for these 2 lectures, we've been talking about theories of learning and how we learn.